Nice to meet you, man.
Yeah, you as well. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. How about yourself?
Good. Thank you for willing to do this.
I'm delighted that you invited me to. Amanda spoke very highly of you, and then I watched some of the things you put down on Facebook, and I was like, "Oh, this is going to be cool."
Oh, thanks. So I can just kind of jump around then and probably try to focus more on things that you might not have talked about as often. Professionally, would everything have started from playing Claudio and Much Ado About Nothing?
Wow, you did your research. Awesome.
Yeah.
That's right. I was on tour with the national players out of the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. Um, the national players, which still exists, it's the oldest continually touring classical repertory. Wait a minute. Do you know this because you're part of the national players? Do you have
No.
something to them? All right. Anyway, yeah, wow. I don't know that that's anywhere out there on my on bio information for me. So good for you for finding that. And I had a blast. Yeah, we spent 9 months touring the eastern half of the U.S. I'm a New Jersey guy, and I don't think I'd really been very much outside of the Northeast in my young life.
Okay.
A year out of college, I got that role. We did exactly 100 performances, and we played big universities and really cool halls and tiny high schools. And yeah, that was my introduction after doing, high school musicals and college shows, and of course all the Super 8 movies I did in the backyard when I was a little kid.
Mhm.
But that was the first time I got paid to work. Other than, while I was in college, I did a lot of commercials and I did a lot of background work on soap operas and on movies. But really doing so I was chasing that kind of work, and it was all really cool because I got to be on the set with some really interesting people and observe them and learn how to conduct business just by watching them. But
Mhm.
then much ado is my first really good paying gig, and it was a 9 month run.
Mhm. And would your first, in terms of the years, like would your first involvement with All My Children be in 1978?
Yeah, I was a sophomore at Fairfield University in Connecticut, and I got an opportunity to audition for a role on All My Children. That was my first professional audition, and it happened because my mom, who was a model in the 1950s in New York, she's a child of Irish immigrants, born and raised in Manhattan. Um, and she became a print model and a beauty queen. There's something in New York City called Miss Subways
Mhm.
that, the musical On the Town, the whole Frank Sinatra, Gene Kelly, they have one day as sailors in New York and they're trying to find Miss Turnstiles, which is a parody of Miss Subways. And my mom was a Miss Subways.
Oh.
And then when she met my dad and got married and had my brother and I real quick, she got out of the business. Although that first year or two, she would bring us as babies to some of her go-sees, and we got work. I apparently had a thriving commercial career that I retired from in order to attend kindergarten.
Wow.
I have no memory of this stuff, but I do know that, I've got 16 millimeter footage of a commercial I did before I was 1 years old.
Mhm.
But I'd always wanted to do this. I was a movie nut, completely obsessed with cinema growing up and making my backyard movies. Um, and then, yeah, in college, when it became clear that this is what I wanted to do, I said to my mom, maybe you have some contacts from, because she also did a lot of uh, game shows,
Yeah.
like Vanna White on Wheel of Fortune.
Right.
My mom did that sort of thing back in the 1950s. And I asked her about any contacts she might have, agents or casting directors. And she said, all of my contacts are dead. Uh, but then when I was in college, she got to know a woman in our local church. And we grew up in the suburbs of Manhattan in New Jersey, right over the George Washington Bridge. And this woman was a casting director for All My Children.
Mhm.
And my mom they got kind of into business doing a fashion show for the church group, the ladies' church group. It's called the Rosary Society. And the casting director, Joan Dinchecko, she would be the MC and she would write it up. And my mom was the lead model, and she would teach the local ladies of the society how to be runway models. And they
Mhm.
had a little business doing this, and they did it from different churches for a while. And she was telling Joan about my interest and my ambition and what I wanted. And she said, well, we have a role coming up for a young guy. Why don't I have him come into audition? and he can see how hard it is. He can see that it's not like a high school show, that it's really, really challenging and difficult and all that. And I mean, I never went into New York City from where we were. So I actually hitched a ride with her, and it was a big deal for me. You know, I knew what the stakes were, but I mean, it was sort of beyond my grasp at the time. And she brought me in, and then I was going to audition, and I was going to find my way back home on the bus. And again, it was all sort of a new thing for me. And I did the audition. And that night she called my mom and she said, bad news, Mary. He's really good. They really like him. He's the best actor they saw. So they gave me background extra work on the show the next week to see how I'd behave on the set. And it just started that way. I ended up not getting that particular role because I didn't match up. The guy who got it matched up much better with the lead actress of that storyline. But then they started using me for that. I do background work. I do stand-in work. I would do what's called U5 work, under 5 lines. Mm-hmm. They would even have me be the reader at auditions for other roles, which was incredibly helpful. What a classroom that was, to be a reader at the auditions. Then I got national players, did that for 9 months, came back to New York when it was over. Started going back to All My Children, because All My Children had kind of become my university that way. Mm. And then I got the audition for this very large role, character named Tad, who's a very popular character on All My Children. And we went to the final line, myself and a couple other guys, and one of the other guys got it, and he continues to play Tad. I mean, he played the role for like 30 some odd years. But the producer, who was new at the time, liked me so much that they decided to create a role for me. Mm-hmm. And that's how I got the Alfred Vanderpool role.
Mm-hmm. And I know it would have been like a little while after that, but what's your memory of sharing a kiss with Julia Roberts?
I wasn't working one day, and there was a very popular character on the show named Cliff, Dr. Cliff Warner. The actor Peter Bergman, who basically went from that role for 20 years to a role on Young and the Restless he's been playing for 30 years. And Peter's a great guy. The general public knew Peter at the time, who they didn't watch soaps, because he's the guy who did the TV commercial, "I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV."
Right, yeah.
That became a famous line, but Peter was the guy. They were bringing on a kid sister for him. And Joan said, you know, "You're not working this day. Would you come in and be the reader? It's going to be an all-day thing." I said, "Great." And there must have been 30 actresses came in reading the role, and I'm reading opposite. And it was an intimate scene, mm-hmm. You know, because they want, since that's a big part of soaps, you know, soaps don't do, or back then, soaps didn't do comedy. They didn't do adventure. They did melodrama. It's all about relationships. Who's getting together with who's getting married, who's getting divorced, who's breaking up, who's making up. So intimacy, kissing scenes, that's a big part of soaps. So let's find out right now at the very beginning at the auditions, who's comfortable with that, who's not comfortable with that. And it was fascinating for me to watch because, you know, young actress after young actress had a wide range of what they would do. I'm sitting there as the reader. Some of them would sort of air kiss. Some of them would kind of do a half kiss. Some of them would do sort of a kind of a tentative kiss. And some of them would, you know, devour me alive, just completely go for it.
Yeah.
And my job as the reader, you know, my job is not as a guy to go, "Wow, this is the best day ever." You know, my job as the reader is to give the auditioning actor what they need. It's not about me getting the job or me getting beautiful women to kiss me. It's about me supporting what they're doing. You know, every time an actor comes in, my attitude was, I want them to get the job and do what I can. So it was all sort of a blur.
Okay.
And who did they cast? But they cast, oh my gosh, I'm going to go blank on her name. Sorry? Melissa Leo. Yeah, Melissa, my good, you're God with all of your research. They cast Melissa Leo. And it was awesome because myself and one of the guys who was one of the makeup guys, we ran the All My Children charity softball team. Where in the summer we'd go out and we'd play some local team and raise charity for it. And Melissa, while she was on the show, was our second baseman, and she was an awesome second baseman.
Oh.
But Now, I don't know, years later, well, whatever year Pretty Woman was out,
Yeah.
because I mean, quite literally, I was having breakfast with a gal at a diner right across from the Ed Sullivan Theater on Broadway, which is where they did Letterman and now they do Stephen Colbert. Diner's not there anymore. It's now a corporate thing. But they're right outside. I could see through the window. There's a telephone booth. Telephone booths. And they had the poster for Pretty Woman. So Pretty Woman was out.
Mhm.
And two guys came in. One guy was an actor who I didn't know. The girl I was with, she knew him, but he was an actor who had been on All My Children. So we both greeted him and he greeted us. And the guy who he was with was his manager, Bobby McGowan. Bobby McGowan was well known for having he had a good eye for young female talent for soaps. But the only actor he represented who wasn't like that was Eric Roberts, back with, the biggies, Pope of Greenwich Village, Star 80, back then, he handled Eric. So we said hi to this guy, Michael Woods, and he introduced his manager, Bobby McGowan, and Bobby said, "I know you're Bill Timoney." I said, "Oh, hi, Bob." I said, "I've known your name." I said, "I've never met you." He said, "Oh, I know all about you. Julia she cracked up about you." I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "Julia Roberts." I said, "Excuse me?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "One summer, Eric said, my kid sister's coming from Georgia. She's going to live in New York for the summer and try to get acting work and take classes. Can you get an audition?" Right now where was she working? Orange Julius or Gray's Papaya, whichever one is on 72nd in Amsterdam. She was the counter girl there, or a counter girl there. Tiny little joint, but she was, pouring juices while she was kind of taking classes that summer. He said, "Yeah." So he said, "I got her very first professional acting audition, and wasn't it at All My Children to be Cliff's kid sister?" And she came to my office immediately after the audition, and she was cracking up because she ended up having to make out with the guy who plays the nerd on the show, Alfred Vanderpool. And that was your character, right? And I said, "I made out with Julia Roberts?" Yeah, she thought it was hilarious because, she knew you as the nerd on the show. I said, "I made out with Julia Roberts?" Said, "Yeah." I said, I have no memory of that.
Okay.
But it became a favorite story of mine. As you might imagine, it's one of my favorite, it's easily a top 10 anecdote.
Yeah.
And a couple of years ago, a buddy of mine was making a movie. I had been at the same theater company with him in the 1990s. His name is Peter Hedges. He's a really, really wonderful playwright, screenwriter, and film director. And Peter's son, Lucas Hedges, has entered the business to great success. He got an Oscar nomination for the movie Manchester by the Sea. So Peter was making a movie with his son, and it was titled Ben is Back. Lucas is playing Ben. And who's playing Ben's mother is Julia Roberts. Now, I do a lot of voice work in movies. It's called ADR group looping.
Right.
I put together looping teams. And because Peter had hired me some years earlier to put together the teams for a movie he did for Disney called The Odd Life of Timothy Green. I was the talent coordinator on all the voice actors in the post-production. So I figured, I wanted the job for Ben is Back. I said, I reached out to the background extras casting director, Grant Wilfley. And I explained to him my deal with Peter. And I said, I'd like to come up for the day, work on the film just to get the idea of what the movie's going to be about. And sure enough, they put me in the first scene of the movie, which is a midnight mass Christmas Eve in a big church. And when Peter saw me on set, he responded quite well. And he decided to make me the head usher. And he had a minute, wanted to talk to me. And he said, do you know Julia? I said, "Funny you should say that." I then do the, 20-second version of the story, and his eyes are so wide about it, And he goes, "That's hilarious." I said, "I'm not going to say anything to her today." He said, no. Because she has a good reputation for being very intense when she's working. She does her job. She's not there to to chat with people. She's there to do her job. So I wasn't going to intrude on that. And we had a fun night shooting, and Peter's kind of tracked me with the camera to open the scene. I'm the head usher walking up and down. And it got cut. It didn't make it in the finished film, but it was a fun day working with him. We wrapped for the night. It was a long night. I go up to the altar of the church, shot in a real church, and Peter's at the top talking to some of his crew. So I thought I would wait. I got up one step on the altar, realized I wasn't going to interrupt, but I do want to say goodbye and thanks, and I'll see him at the looping in 6 months or whatever. So I figured I'd wait. So I step back and I turn around, and boom, right there is Julia Roberts.
Mm-hmm.
She's waiting to say goodnight to Peter as well. And it just came out. Julia, you won't remember this, but my name is Bill Timoney, and I was the reader for you at your very first audition at All My Children. And she looked at me with these big eyes and she went, but I didn't get it. Which tells you everything you need to know about the drive required for actors to become successful in this industry. She remembered after all of her success, and how many other people can you name who have had such an incredible sustained movie stardom success than Julia Roberts?
Mm-hmm.
And she still remembered that the first audition she did not book.
Yeah.
And then I went, I know. And I'm sure it was all my fault. I thought I'd be gracious. And then I stepped forward and I put my hands on her waist and I hugged her. And as I'm doing it, I'm thinking, are you out of your mind? This woman doesn't know you. Why are you hugging her? But she hugged me. And thank goodness, how does our hug get interrupted? Bound. Here comes Peter Hedges. Julia, this is one of my best friends, Bill Timoney. And many years ago, Bill was and at the same time that I turned to Peter and I go, I just told her, Julia goes, he just told me. So that is the update on the Julia Roberts kissed me story.
Okay. So, and I know too that the first time that you moved to LA, wasn't it because Susan Lucci like urged you to try and?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say quite urged, but you know, I had 3 good years on that show. I was the comedy relief in what was known as the Greg and Jenny storyline, which was their youth storyline. And at the time, our show was number 2. Only General Hospital of the 13 soaps on the air was higher rated than our show.
Mm-hmm.
And their young storyline was Luke and Laura. And our Greg and Jenny we were like, that was the Luke and Laura for our show. And I was the comedy relief role. So, you know, I wasn't on every day, but I got a lot of exposure. I mean, we would have over 5 million people watch our show every day.
Mm-hmm.
There are primetime TV shows now that don't get 1 million people, and we had 5 million every day. And of course, Susan was the queen, not only of our show, she was the queen of daytime. And my 4th year on the show, my involvement was very, very small. My number of shows had wound down. I don't know if the show knew what to do with me anymore. But it was, you know, at the time I'm in my mid-20s, you got to find out what it's like in LA and all that sort of thing. So, yeah, somebody got back to me and they said, hey, there was a discussion in the makeup room the other day about pilot season, actors on our show who should go to pilot season, which was mid-January to mid-March out in LA. Back then, that was the thing. You know, you'd go out into LA to see if you could book a pilot for a show. And this person telling me said, and Susan Lucci said, well, the only person on our show right now who should be out in LA for pilot season is Billy Timoney, because we do melodrama and Billy's playing sitcom technique. And LA is where they do all the sitcoms. So that was sort of, I mean, I was wondering what I was going to do and was I going to take the plunge and give it a try? But when I heard that, that made up my mind to go. And interestingly enough, Susan and I have been talking and getting together about a possible project. We saw each other in New York only really just before Thanksgiving.
Oh.
And we may have, you know, I know COVID is making everything a challenge now, but we're talking about doing a live theater project. And my goodness, she is just the best. She's the best every possible, I mean, any category, she's A+ across the board. And she's just so great to be around. You can't help but want to do your best work when you're doing work with Susan Lucci.
Mm-hmm. And so when you did move back to New York and get involved with voiceover, was it Urotsukidoji first?
Yeah, but there's a hole there. I mean, I came back, I did not do well in LA. I came back, I did not know, I was actually so deflated about not being able to figure out how to advance my career that I didn't know what I was going to do. And I went through then the obligatory, actor survival jobs.
Mhm.
I waited on tables. I was doing paralegal work at one of this massive, the largest law firm in the world, and they would do full shifts, including graveyard, midnight to 8 a.m. And I was a graveyard shift paralegal. The idea being that then during the day I could audition, which was not true. During the day I slept. But there were some very interesting people who were working those shifts with me, writers, directors, people who went on to do well in the business. Bartended, but I had been trying to find my way into voice work because I'd known ever since I was 12 about this thing called looping that nobody else seemed to know about and nobody talked about. But I kept asking, and I found somebody who, she was the office receptionist at an agency that was representing me. And one day she called me and said, I have something that you might want to do. And I said, really? She said, no, not really. You really won't want to do it, but nobody else wants to do it. So it's an opportunity for you to get in. And, the longer you go through life, the more you realize that's how you find an opportunity to advance, is when you're willing to do something that nobody else wants to do. I'm a huge old time monster movie fan. My heroes as a boy were Boris Karloff and Peter Cushing and Roger Corman. And Karloff had been kicking around until he was in his 40s when the opportunity for Frankenstein came by. But he was going to have to be up at 3 o'clock in the morning and endure 6 hours of makeup and blah, blah, blah. And that's why the people who they had offered it to had all turned it down. But he realized this was his opportunity by being willing to do something that nobody else wants to do, that he could make a break for himself. And he did, and today it's indelible. It's one of the most iconic film characterizations of all time. Not that what I did in Urotsukidoji is the same, but I looked at it and I held my nose because it's just a repugnant thing. But I was literally behind in my rent that month, and I did not know how I was going to pay the rent when this gig came up, and it turned out to be just a fantastic opportunity for me.
And one of my
content aside, of course.
Yeah. Well, somebody wanted me to ask too if you knew anything about the real name of the actor that played the lead in that.
No, I intentionally did not look at. I still cannot tell you the names of the. At one time, I knew the name of the creator because that, the American distributor licensor cut it into 2 parts and released it as Legend of the Overfiend and Legend of the Demon Moom. And I actually worked a couple of days on it because I had, not only did I have such a large role, but they found out that I could vary my voice and I could work fast. So they didn't have to hire other actors. I am all over that movie. There's one scene where these 2 guys are talking and I'm both guys. But I did not go out of my way to learn anything about the originators of the original Japanese.
Okay. Well, I did read too that someone who played your girlfriend in the movie was your girlfriend in real life at the time too.
Yeah. I brought her in because she'd go, you're doing what? Because at the time this was new. As a little boy, I didn't realize how much anime I watched. Gigantor was on, which I watched. Tobar the Ape Man was on, and I watched that. I loved, as a little kid, I loved Kim of the White Lion. And I hated Speed Racer. When I was a little kid, Astro Boy had actually was before me. So those were the 4 shows I watched, which I later learned were anime and Miyazaki. But then around that time, the late 90s, well, mid 90s even, early 90s, we had Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball Z on television, and we had Akira and Ghost in the Shell in the theaters. Yeah, and then comes along this thing. And I'd been looking to get into dubbing and looping. And yet, when my first day when, I saw her that evening and I was describing this stuff and she was like, what? And I said, you want to come by? And she did. And they still hadn't cast Akemi. And so they just, I was getting along very well with the guys on the board. And I said, well, why don't you read hers? She said, sure. Okay. And she got up and she was not an actress. She was a model. but she was game to try it, and she was great. So they cast her as a Keme. We then did something that I've never seen anybody write about, and it was for a different distributor. It wasn't for Central Park Media. It's something called Eyes of Mars. E.
Yo,
Dot, I. Dot, yeah. Are you familiar with it?
yeah.
Really? Because I don't know anybody who's ever seen it or heard of it.
Okay.
I think it was originally titled Mother. It's a very environmental slant to it, and we're both the lead voices in that as well.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, that was kind of the extent of her voice acting career, but it was the start of mine.
Mm-hmm. And was Lotus War like around the same time?
Within the next year or two, Central Park Media started using us quite a bit, and a friend of mine, that person who had found me this opportunity. Oh, okay. Did you see Joker?
Yeah.
Okay. De Niro has Phoenix on his talk show.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a woman sitting in a big fur coat next to Joker named Dr. Sally, I think. Yes, Dr. Sally. And Joker ends up kissing her or something. Dr. Sally was played by Sandra James.
Mm-hmm.
Sandra James is also in, what's the first Tom Holland Spider-Man?
Okay.
When he stops the guy from breaking into a car, but it's the guy's car. He's locked his keys in, and then suddenly Stan Lee is leaning out of a window and a lady is leaning out of another window. Marjorie, how's your mother? Oh, it's good to see you. That's Sandra James.
Okay.
Sandra had a tremendous late career surge as an on-camera actor, and Joker and the Spider-Man are only two of these roles she got to play. But back then, she was coordinating ADR looping teams. And so she and I went into business providing the dubbers for Central Park Media. But nobody did that. Looping is different from dubbing. Dubbing, you have to kind of, dubbing is very square peg in a round hole.
Right.
And so Sandra said, you handle it. She said, we'll use my name, but you handle it. So I put together the cast for the dubbing sessions for Battle Skippers, My, Iria, Zeran, the animation.
Yep.
And I would do bit parts in there myself, and sometimes Sandra would too. Actually, in Legend of the Overfiend, if you know it well, you know that floating monkey creature, Kuroko?
Yeah.
That's Sandra.
Oh.
So Sally and Joker is the voice of Kuroko in Legend of the Overfiend.
Wow.
Hey, boss. Yeah. So we were casting these things. And then their biggie was Record of Lotus War. And I looked at it and I said, oh, I got to play Parn. So she submitted me, and the guys at Central Park Media said, no. We don't want Bill. We've heard his voice a lot. Let's get some new people in here. Now, I had been the guy finding people from my theater company I was with, the one that Peter was I would bring these people in and train them. My girlfriend who was a model, I trained her, so I was bringing in people I was showing them how to be a dubber. So I was really bummed that they said they'd heard my voice too much and they wanted somebody else. So Sandra said, well, when I submit the auditions, I just have a number and I keep the master, so auditioner number 3, she just says audition number 3, and she has a master. Number 3 is Chris Mayick.
Mm-hmm.
So when they decide on your voice that they want you to play that role, they don't know your name. They just say to Sandra, we want number 3 for such and such a part. So she submitted me with my Parn audition. Now Parn is younger, so I bounced up my voice just a little bit, maybe play it up there a bit more instead of playing it down there. And then she just had the number. She didn't have the name. And she said, if they ask my name, she'd give them a fake name. What name do you want to use? And I used Billy Regan.
Yeah.
So yeah, they came back to her and they went, that guy, who's that guy? Who's number 7? He's fantastic. She said, well, that's a guy named Billy Regan. Well, he's playing Parn. So that's how that happened. So once that happened, I felt like I'd created this whole persona of this anime voice actor. So in subsequent anime jobs, I always kept the name Billy Regan. Mm-hmm. So I had this alter ego, and every now and then I still put his name in things.
Yeah.
In fact, I've looked on my IMDb page, and people have gone in there and credited me for something I didn't do. That they've put they put Billy Regan's name in there, put it on my page. I'm like, yeah, but I didn't do that one.
Yeah.
So that's the story behind that one.
Do you think that you have the most affinity with Parn than with anime characters that you played?
Well, because there was so much involved, I got my brother, who's an actor, to voice my father,
Oh,
Parn's father, Tessius, in a quick flashback. His wife, my sister-in-law, is the voice of Carla, and she was fantastic. And yeah, I just found a lot of my friends' work, and that was very meaningful to me because some of them went on to great success as voice actors.
mhm.
And like me, they were out of work theater actors working, downtown and off Broadway for no money. And now I got their way into this business and they took off with it. So Lotus War is very meaningful for me because of how many people I helped.
Mhm.
I love the role. That was meaningful for me as well. And I think even now, like if I went to an anime con, I think that's what I would be best known for. But I think the role, I mean, that's how I want to see myself as Parn.
Mhm.
But who I probably really am is much more Madarame in Genshiken.
Okay.
And in fact, Madarame is a cousin to Alfred Vanderpool and All My Children,
Mhm.
whose glasses, very insecure, finds ways to assume characters instead of just being himself. There's a scene in Genshiken where Madarame is alone in the clubhouse, the college office, with what is the girl's name? What's the character's name? She's the only female. She's going out with the guy who's into gaming,
Mhm.
and she's attractive. And none of the other guys in the club. It's very Big Bang Theory. I think Genshiken, when I look back on it, has a very Big Bang Theory feel to it. And he doesn't know what to say to her. And it must be a 10, 15-minute long scene with just the two of them. She's reading something, and it goes into his mind of what it's feeling like to being in the same room as an attractive woman and not knowing how to behave. Probably my favorite scene ever that I dubbed in terms of anime dubs. So
Okay.
yeah, I'd like to say I'm very close to Parn, but I'm probably closer to Madarame.
Mhm. What about with Kuroneko and Trigun?
That came at a streak. When I lived in LA, I tried LA my second time
Yeah.
in the late 90s. Because a friend of mine was making a movie and he wanted me to help him make the movie. So I moved out there, but I still had to find a way to stay alive. So I found my way into some anime dubbing out there, thanks to a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful person named Leah Sargent,
Right. Yeah.
who's one of the all-time great people on the planet. And her dad, a fine filmmaker, Joseph Sargent, whose movies, I'm a cinemaniac. So I love Sargent. He made the original Taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3, which is one of the great movies of all time.
Mhm.
And Leah would direct, she'd adapt scripts and direct dubs for a guy named Kevin Seymour at a little dubbing house called Animes
Right.
out in the valley. And they got me a lot of, Leah brought me in a lot. But she always had me doing these tiny bit roles and what we call bits and walla. Walla are the crowd scenes where, 3 or 4 or 5 of you do all the, you mumble or whatever. Through Leah, I had a whole streak of doing these really interesting anime dubs, but not having very large roles. And they all kind of became one thing or another. What is Kurenko in Trigun? Is that the cat with the green eyes?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I mean, I did Outlaw Star. I did Cowboy Bebop.
Right.
I did something very cool called Serial Experiments Lane.
Mhm.
I did a Street Fighters. I did a whole bunch of these things. And I had a really cool thing, again, doing bit parts in something called Perfect Blue.
Yeah.
You like Perfect Blue?
Yeah.
Not enough people know how cool Perfect Blue is. Natalie Portman. You know about Natalie Portman in Perfect Blue?
Yeah.
Do people not know that Black Swan is basically Perfect Blue?
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's obvious, but
Some
maybe
people,
not.
well, again, a lot of people who saw Black Swan don't know anime and had never heard of Perfect Blue.
Right.
But I said to Leah during a break, I think it was during the recording of Perfect Blue, I said, I did a lot of lead roles back in New York when I was dubbing for Central Park Media. I said, you you could bring me in for lead roles. She said, oh, well, I thought you wanted to work. I thought you needed money. I said, yeah. She said, even the lead roles on these things, the shifts are maybe 2 hours maximum. You said, when I do a bits and wallet team, you're working 6 hours and you get paid by the hour. So I went, never mind. So during that LA segment of my career, I didn't do any lead roles, but that was because the group bits and walla actors got more hours, and and I needed the money. So I always did the bit roles instead of the lead roles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, most of the voice actors I've talked to are part of that original LA group, like Bridget Hoffman and Wendy Lee and Kirk Thornton and tons of people like that. Yeah,
I think I did a group with Kirk one time. Like I'm sure I've crossed paths with most of them, the Epcars and people like that. But I don't really remember. And it was a tough time for me. Then I was in my late 30s, early 40s. And I was spinning my wheels a lot. And at the same time, I was not socializing. I wasn't, other than like, say, somebody amazing like Leah Sargent, I wasn't going out of my way to connect with people because I didn't like the idea that I wanted to hang out with people to see if I could get work from them.
Yeah. Right.
So I would avoid that. My most favorite moment, not most favorite, but one of my favorite moments is also a kind of a horrible moment. When I was out in LA that first time, after what Susan said, I got to be pals with a casting director, a wonderful guy by the name of Billy DeMotta. I would call him Billy D. He would call me Billy T. And he worked at the casting office of Jackie Birch. Jackie Birch was a big deal casting director. I think she cast Die Hard. And she was in the streak of casting a bunch of movies for Schwarzenegger, like his early films like Raw Deal and Predator. That's Jackie Birch. And Billy was the casting associate on that. And we're out one night having burgers and beers at Barney's Beanery. And he was telling me about his latest project. And there was never a discussion about me auditioning for it, but it was mostly cast, but there was one character they hadn't cast yet. I said, well, what is it? He said, well, it's a Stephen King book, but he changed his name to write the book, and Schwarzenegger is going to play it. I said, what's it called? He said, The Running Man. I said, oh, cool. He described the futuristic blah, blah, blah. And I said, this is really cool. He said, the gag to it is that he keeps confronting another champion and defeating that other champion. And we're trying to escalate to tougher and tougher guys. And we're at the next to last guy now. And we're having a hell of a time casting. We can't find anybody because they also got to be able to act, be in a movie and all. They can't just be a tough athlete or something.
Mm-hmm.
I said, what about Jim Brown? He said, you mean I Feel Good, Jim Brown? I said, no, that's James Brown. He said, Jim Brown, the football player. Dirty Dozen. Oh, I hadn't thought of him. Can he act? I said, on your way home, stop off at the video store near the beach called Vidiot's. Pick up a copy of the James Toback movie, Fingers, starring Harvey Keitel. You watch it tonight. Jim Brown is in it. You call me tomorrow morning and you tell me if Jim Brown can act. Well, Billy didn't call me the next morning. He called me 2 mornings later. And he goes, not only are you right that Jim Brown can act, but we just had a meeting with him and he's going to play the role. So that was for better or worse, stuff like that motivated me. It was really cool to make that happen. Nobody knows it was me, but I really dug it. And during my time hanging out with Billy, I told him that I had an odd encounter at All My Children. I'd received a couple of fan letters. And fan letter, the network would give you more days based on the fan mail that came in. They wouldn't read it, but they would count it.
Mm-hmm.
And whoever got more fan mail would get more shows, And there's one day I got like three fan letters that all were criticizing me about how could I do such a horrible thing. And they all had like Midwest return addresses. And I didn't understand what this horrible thing was. But apparently I had starred in this movie that was so objectionable that there's this terrible moment in the movie where a young woman is attacked by a man whose head is disconnected from his body, but he's holding his head in his hands as he attacks this woman. You ever hear of a movie called Reanimator?
Oh, yeah.
Jeffrey Combs as Dr. Herbert West
Right. Yeah.
with the glasses and the kind of nerdy look. Well, some people out there who are All My Children fans had gone to see Reanimator just because they saw the poster and they thought it was me.
Oh, wow.
And I told Billy this story. And some months later, he calls me, goes, I need you to meet me tomorrow morning at 11:30 at such and such a place. And he gives me the address. And it's in the Hollywood Hills up above Fountain. It's right up above the Magic Castle. Oh my God. It's this beautiful place right up above Yamashiro's. Is that the name of Yamashiro's? Yamashiro's was a Japanese steakhouse sushi place that was notorious in my world because it was where they shot part of this infamous movie, the Kentucky Fried Movie.
Mhm.
I was terribly excited. I was looking down at Yamashiro's. Was that the name? I think so. Well, who is it but Brian Yuzna, the producer of Reanimator. Billy had told him my story about people mistaking me for Jeffrey Combs or Jeffrey Combs for me. Well, they were making the sequel, Bride of the Reanimator.
Right. Yeah.
They weren't going to cast the 3 leads from the first one. They were going to replace him with other actors. So I had this great meeting with Brian Yuzna, got to know him, and I left that meeting, on cloud 9. And here's the hope that I was going to be the star of Bride of the Reanimator. And it took me far too long to realize how Hollywood works.
Mhm.
There was never any intention of hiring me to play Dr. Herbert West in Bride of the Reanimator. Now, the other guy and the female lead, they both got replaced because they weren't willing to work for the low rate that Yuzna wanted to pay them. They wanted a lot more money to star in the sequel, and the producers wanted to pay him actually less money. But Jeffrey Combs was holding out, and they realized they could make the movie without the other 2, but they couldn't make the movie without Jeffrey Combs. But they couldn't pay him what he wanted them to pay him.
Mhm.
So they used me to bring Jeffrey back to the bargaining table.
Oh,
No, we got this guy from the popular soap opera All My Children. People mistake him for you, and so that's how Jeffrey Combs agreed to whatever fee for Bride of the Reanimator, because they used me as a bargaining tool.
and with all the ADR that you've done for major films, is there like a single highlighted story that stands out the
Yep.
most?
Anybody watching this, please pick up back copies of that wonderful, wonderful magazine, Videoscope. I've been writing for Videoscope for some time now. It's the Phantom of the Movies Videoscope magazine. And I write a column for them called Heard But Not Seen, Adventures in Voice Acting.
Okay.
And I do each column, it's a quarterly publication. And each column is about a different aspect of not only my voice acting career, but also a larger element about the business in general. So I've already written some of my biggies, but I got to tell you, working with Frank Oz, and I've worked with him 4 or 5 times now. Working with Frank Oz is unbelievably mind-blowingly cool. It's just so great. I was doing a movie. I was on the team for Frank for a movie called Bowfinger with Steve Martin. No, well, I am on Bowfinger. Do you know Bowfinger?
Yeah.
Steve Martin, Eddie Murphy. When Eddie Murphy has he goes to this self-help churchy thing, new agey thing called Mindhead. And when he goes in the elevator, you hear this droning, "Welcome to Mindhead. Welcome to," and that's me. So I'm the voice of Mindhead in Bowfinger. But the movie we did before that was In and Out with Kevin Kline.
Mhm.
And the setup. And the morning after he's outed by his former student on the Academy Awards, he shows up to teach at his high school in Indiana. And there are all these reporters on the lawn outside the school waiting for him. And they go rushing after him, and he flees. It's a fun little bit. So we got up, the group of us. Now we're going to improvise what the on-camera people are yelling. All these small town reporters, as they're chasing him with their cameras and their microphones, they're yelling things after him. And hopefully your viewers know that most of the time when those things are shot, the on-camera actors aren't saying anything.
Right.
For one thing, they're extras, and extras get paid 1/10 what day players get paid. And the other thing is, when you do group stuff, the audio editors are not going to be able to separate it. So if you got a principal talking in the foreground, you can't have background people really talking because it's going to bleed into the dialogue. So we're doing the take where we're all chasing after Kevin Kline, shouting questions about him, and we know what the backstory is, and we know what his name is, and we know that Matt Dillon's name is Brandon, and all these other things. And in the middle of doing the take, I shout out, "Do you know Ellen?" Because at the time, Ellen DeGeneres had just come out on her sitcom on ABC, the Ellen DeGeneres Show. And it was big news. Remember, everybody was talking about it. So the idea that somebody in small town Indiana would think one gay person would know another gay person because they're both gay, even though they're thousands of miles away. Well, it cracked everybody up. We had to stop because everybody was laughing on the team, and Frank was laughing, and the editors were laughing. So Frank goes, "Bill, let's do that as a single. I want to be able to place it." So instead of it being a whole group, I get up to the mic and I reel off a couple of, "Do you know Ellen? Do you know Ellen? Do you know Ellen?" Cut. Frank goes, "Bill, you're going to kill me." And I turned to Frank and I went, "It'd be funnier with a female voice, right?" He went, "Right." I go, "I don't mind at all. I understand." So one of the actresses on the team got up and she recorded it. And that's what's in the finished product. And sure enough, the way Frank places it and has it spike out over and above everybody else's yelling, it gets a laugh.
Mhm.
So the idea that I used my creative process to help Frank Oz get a laugh in a movie is just really cool. So when you talk about favorite things, that's a tiny little thing in the spectrum of things, but it's something that I'm really proud of. And I think it's just so cool I was able to pull it off.
Yeah. And so on the topic of Pokemon, I would guess that you probably had the most affinity with Harley.
Harley was the first voice I ever did on Pokemon. Well, I go in there and I see how he's drawn with the hips forward and the hands on his hips and the loose wrist. And the first cue is, "Hi, hon, say, nice Pokemon." And I go, I can't do this.
Mm-hmm.
This is offensive. This is from an earlier time. This sort of stereotype is really demeaning and is no longer acceptable. They said, well, then we'll just find somebody else and pay them. "Hi, hon." No, I didn't. No, they said, look, they said, "We agree, but it's how it's drawn and it's how it's recorded and it's what the Japanese want." So, I mean, I did it.
Yeah.
I would have preferred not to do it. I don't think it's right. On the other hand, I'm really grateful for the job.
Mm-hmm.
And it then got me into the Pokemon universe. I love voicing Conway. I love voicing the guy. My most recent guy was a couple years ago, George Chirinos,
Mm-hmm.
who was a TV reality show producer with like the salmon colored sweater, always, tied loosely around his shoulders. And he was a lot of fun to do. Probably my favorite though is, actually, I worked with my wife. We did a bickering couple named Izzy and Kara.
Okay.
In like season, I don't know. But he's very squat and heavy set, and he's got only a few strands of hair over his bald head. And Kara's very passive aggressive in the way she nags him. It was really fun. But probably my favorite is Nando.
Okay.
The troubadour, because he would strike his whatever mandolin, lyre, or whatever, and he would sing most of his dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
But even though they had the words, and you would get a note on the first strike, they really had no melody. So they let me make up the melody, and I'm not a singer, but it was so much fun. And I did it like Antonio Banderas as Puss in Boots.
Oh, yeah.
So in fact, I called the character Antonio Bandero. So it would be "It is so nice to see you again, Don. I like the way you coach your Pokemon. The pointy end goes in the other man." So I just did a Antonio Banderas impression. And that's probably my most favorite role over there is Nando on Pokemon.
Okay. And I know that kind of related to what, in relation to Harley, I know that you got to be part of Gravitation.
Yeah, that was a very cool job. by then I was up at Joe DeGiorgi's headline, and I was voicing roles, but he also hired me to adapt the scripts, cast the talent, and direct the dubbing sessions.
Mhm.
It was a very odd thing that had happened. I had just moved back. I'd met the woman who'd become my wife, and she actually flew out to LA and moved me out of my apartment at the beach and drove me across the country to get me back to New Jersey. But I got back to New Jersey and I'm like, well, what am I going to do? There really wasn't much looping happening in New York, and I didn't know. Just before I'd left, well, while I was in LA, I had done that second Lodos War, which was called Heroic Knight, Chronicles of the Heroic Knight.
Right.
And the guy named Michael Albin was the guy doing it, writing, producing, and directing. And he did it up at Joe's place at Headline, which is how I got to know Joe. And then Michael had passed away. But now that I was back, I thought, well, let me find the guy's phone number and reach out to him. And I did. And I reminded him who I was and told him I was looking to get into directing, because I had directed a bunch of the Record of Lodos War dubbing sessions. I had directed the first 5 or 6 of those episodes.
Mm-hmm.
So I did have some experience. I thought, well, let me see if I can get into that. And I left a message for Joe, and he called me back. And he said, this is really frightening. He said, when you called, I was on the other line with a voice actor named Crispin Freeman.
Oh.
Crispin was going to direct a dub for me. And he just called me to tell me he decided to move to LA and pursue voice work out in Los Angeles. And I thought, well, I just lost my director. What am I going to do now? And then I heard your message. So I basically got the job that Crispin was going to do,
mm-hmm.
which was direct and adapt Gokudo Swordsman Extraordinaire.
Mm-hmm.
But while we were prepping it, we also did a 3-episode thing called Jewel Bem Hunter Line. We did a one-off called Madara. And then we brought in both Gravitation and Genshigen. That's all over a span of a couple of years.
Right.
Yeah, but gosh, but all those titles, but those 3 Gs, Gokudo, Gravitation, and Genshigen, I'm the most proud of in terms of my script adapts and my directing.
And this would have been LA based, but I don't know if you remember being in you did incidental voices in all of the dot hack games.
It took me maybe 10 minutes.
Oh.
I had finished whatever, Lane, Perfect Blue, whatever. And we wrapped and we went. And as we were leaving, either Leah or Kevin said, hey, you got a couple minutes? I said, oh, well, I was just, it's a paid job. I said, sure. And they brought me in, and it was maybe, the whole thing about James Earl Jones in the first Star Wars, that it took him about 20 minutes to do those. I mean, how many lines does Darth Vader have in number 4? It's maybe a dozen lines.
Yeah.
Well, it was like that. I'm a voice of a computer, I think. And whatever those lines I recorded, they're used in all of those subsequent dot hacks.
Okay.
But they're all just being recycled from that one. And I'm in maybe 10 minutes. If I recorded 20 lines, but they're all the instructions, they're all the commands, and they're just the responses. I know I don't have it's not a person. It's just a blinking light on a console or something.
Right.
So I have no memory of what those lines were, but yeah, I look on my IMDb page and I'm like, oh, they used it again, huh? Oh, they used it again, huh?
Yeah. I know I haven't brought up Battle Arena yet with Duke.
So Angora Deb,
yeah,
is a really good voice actor. And I brought Angora Deb into the business, and I trained her. She and I were on another job, and I went, you got a great voice for anime. She goes, I love anime. And I said, I'd like to bring you in for this thing. And she did, and she was great. And then we got her the audition for this. Turns out Toshinden is her favorite of all time. Oh. And she voiced one of the female leads. I'm not sure what it was. But yeah, they ended up just kind of throwing me a bone, and they said, Duke B. Braveheart, he's really important in the whole thing. But for this factual video, he only comes at the very end. I mean, it's a really quick role. I think it has maybe 4 or 5 lines. Kind of announces himself from his steed, so I kind of did it like that. But then right after that, I was heading back to LA, And the guys called me. They said, "Can you come up tonight? We got another one that we'd like you to do." And it was called Voltage Fighter Gao Kaiser.
Right.
You seen that one?
Yeah.
I was kind of twisted. I went in, you don't get the script ahead of time. You don't get told anything ahead of time. One of the interesting things about doing voice work when you dub is you don't have to figure out how to play the character, because the character is already drawn, unless it's prelay. But if it's not prelay and you're just syncing, the performance is already there. Like if you go, should I whisper this role or should I shout this role?
Right.
And they run the tape, and if the guy's shouting, well, then you're shouting. And the guy I played was kind of the villain, and his girlfriend is like the villainess. And there was some, it wasn't overfiend explicit, but there was like some fan service explicit sexual content between
Right.
the two. Until like my next to last cue, and I find out that they're actually brother and sister.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, "Excuse me, is anybody going to tell me this?" And they went, "We forgot," which they didn't forget. They just wanted me to do it without telling me. So I would go ahead and do it. That's probably the Gao Kaiser one's probably my least favorite. It was a much bigger part than Duke v. Braveheart, but in retrospect, I could have done without that one.
Yeah. Well, I know obviously you got to be like the naughty cat wand thing in Queen's Blade.
I love that character. If you know my work in Parn, you may not recognize me in Matarame's voice in Genshiken. But what I did with Satora in Queen's Blade was to do it in a way that nobody who knows my other work would ever know it was me. And, and he's not a real thing. He's the top of a staff.
Yeah.
And although he has eyes and he seems to have teeth, his mouth doesn't move. So I did the character like his jaws clenched. But the reason why he's clenched is because he's trying to withhold because he's so passionate to be polite about it. He's always trying to restrain himself from doing what he would love to do if he could get off that staff when he sees these characters go by. So it's, "Oh, my lady, look at her, my God." It was that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it was just a great time to do that kind of a role. I'll give it to you, and I'll give you a whole circle to it. When I joined All My Children, they wanted my character is very upscale.
Right.
And they wanted me to talk with my jaw out and my teeth like this. In fact, the producer came up to me and said, "Yeah, do the lines like that." And of course, the only thing that I thought was it was like Thurston Howe on Gilligan's Island. And I thought, I'd like to work. There's no way I'm going to do that. So I didn't. I found a way for the character to speak officiously. Like he was far too cultured for his age. And I just dropped out contractions. The first couple of months of scripts had contractions, and I wouldn't say don't, I would say do not. And then after a while, they got into what I was doing, and the writers just never bothered to put a contraction in my script. But I never could figure out why they wanted me to talk like that. And I realized, going far enough back to when those people were younger, the Many Lives of Dobie Gillis, which was a big show with, was it Dwayne Hickman played Dobie Gillis, and Tuesday Weld was his girlfriend, and Gilligan, Bob Denver played his beatnik buddy Maynard Krebs. That was how Denver made his bones prior to Gilligan. But they had like Mr. Perfect, super stud jock athlete on the show because it took place in a high school. And it was played by an impossibly handsome young guy named Warren Beatty. And Beatty left the show after a couple of seasons, but they still needed that foil because the guy's mother was incredibly wealthy, like Beverly Hills wealthy. And he always referred to her as Mumsy. It was always, "Mumsy said I shouldn't quite do that with people like you." And there was a wonderful actor named Steve Franken, a character actor whose work I always liked. And he did that character like that. And I finally realized, well, there's what they wanted me to do with Alfred Vanderpool, was to play it like Steve Franken on Dobie Gillis. So I'm glad I figured it out, and I'm really glad I didn't do it. But I did steal it all those years later for Satora on Queen's Blade.
Yeah. I did think it was interesting too, because I'm personally like a pretty big fan of it, that Greenwood has 2 dubs.
Yeah, I didn't know they did a second one. I was bummed when I found that out. I really liked doing that one.
Yeah.
Because I cast it. I started Ed Paul, who's the lead in Here's Greenwood, and he then voiced Ato in Lodos War. And I thought it was fantastic in that one too. And I was bummed when I found out they also, I helped cast and I directed some episodes of something called Comic Party.
Right. Yeah.
Liam
O'Brien.
And my wife Georgette is Yu Inagawa in that. And I found out many years later that some other company did a second dub of that too. I was bummed. Bummed.
So is there anything else that's coming up that you can like safely talk about that you're a part of in general?
Sure. The upcoming season premiere of Billions on Showtime with Paul Giamatti.
Okay.
This is season 6 and it starts on January 23rd. I have a small little part in it. I get to sort of fulfill my Dwight Fry fantasy, if you know Dwight Fry from Frankenstein and Dracula and Frankenstein meets the Wolfman and all that. There's a motif of angry villagers carrying pitchforks and rakes and shovels and torches. We're seen in the very beginning and in the very end. But there's a little scene where Paul Giamatti's character comes into a bar and he chats up a couple locals at the bar, and I'm one of the locals. So it's a nice little part. And I'm also in those pitchforks. He's like, Giamatti's driving this enormous tractor, and I'm like at the head of the mob following him. So it's a quick thing. I got a quick thing on an episode of Marvelous Mrs. Maisel that'll be on this season, which I can't tell you more about. And also, if you watch the CBS show FBI, we've got a nice thing coming up in an episode. I think the title of the episode is Grief. And I have a quick one-scene role with Jeremy Sisto's character where I play a Catholic priest. So that was a nice little thing with him. Yeah, and otherwise I got some very cool dubbing jobs that are out there, live action dubs on Netflix and Disney Plus and places like that. They haven't really hit yet, so I shouldn't really talk about them, but
Okay.
I'm always working, always got something going on. Actually, I'm auditioning for an anime dub this week for a project that's going to be out there on one of the streaming services too.
Okay.
So yeah, there's always, but if we're wrapping up, there are a couple things that I'm really, really proud of that I wish people would find. There's an animated film out of Argentina called The Star Maker. It's all computer generated, and it's about a little boy on whatever little planet he's on, and he looks up in the sky and he sees that all the stars are going out. So he gets on his little rocket sled and he goes to the place where they make the stars so he can save the stars.
Okay.
Great little film. And along the way, he stops on a tiny asteroid fueling station that's been long closed. And he finds an obsolete hospitality robot. And he's able to restart the robot, Unit 19. And Unit 19 becomes his companion on this quest. And I'm the voice of Unit 19.
Okay.
And Unit 19, as a hospitality robot, he does advertising. Suddenly he'll project a commercial, like R2D2 projecting "Help Me, Obi-Wan Kenobi," and I do all the commercial voices as well.
Okay.
So the Star Maker is one of my all-time favorite gigs, and I really wish people would seek it out. There's also a live-action film from Eastern Europe called "My Grandpa is an Alien." And in the English language version, I'm the voice of Dodo the robot, who's once again the sidekick companion to, this time it's a young gal who's trying to save the day. And finally, there's a wonderful thing out there that we did at Headline, my last thing, which is some years ago, which is called Magical Witch Puni-chan, where I did the scripts. So I didn't direct, but I did the adaptations, and I put in I voiced a bunch of small roles. And it's the most out there thing I've ever done. It is just nuts. Magical Witch Puni-chan is hilarious.
Okay.
And if you hadn't had enough of me watching this, whoever you are watching this now sometime in the future, please seek out The Star Maker, My Grandpa is an Alien, and Magical Witch Puni-chan. I thank you.
Well, actually, one thing I did.
Oh, I had such a good ending. And now we got one more. Okay, wait a minute. I got to get another hit of my blueberry smoothie.
Okay.
All right, I'm ready for you. Ask me your questions. I'm not afraid.
Well, one of my signature ones is always what is the darkest headspace you've had to get into for a voiceover role?
I did Bruce Willis's groans in The Sixth Sense when he's shot in the belly. That was a pretty cool thing because you're gasping for air to stay alive. And I also did, if you know, the first sequel to Silence of the Lambs called Hannibal,
Right.
where Gary Oldman, this grotesquely disfigured Gary Oldman, gets pitched out of his wheelchair by his formerly loyal aide, played by Jelko Ivanek, and he gets pitched into this pack of wild boars who shred him to bits. And I did those shrieks of death. Plus, 12 Monkeys. You know, I played a nice role on the first season of 12 Monkeys, the Sci-Fi Channel TV series. I played Senator Royce. But then for the next 3 seasons, my character wasn't on, but I bounced over to the ADR group looping team.
Mm-hmm.
And in the second or third season, there are these 2 dark characters, a man and a woman, who come up to this guy and they pin him down on with some kind of ritual stuff painted on the floor, whatever, pentagram, whatever. And the guy's spread eagle, spread out. And they have this really ornate sort of spine dagger that they use to cut out his heart or whatever. And this guy does about 45 seconds of torment in terror before they start eviscerating him, disemboweling him, whatever. And they gag him midway through it. And I did what's known as chasing. I didn't watch it to prepare myself. I just had the creator of the show told me what was going to happen. And I just watched and I got ready and I went to that dark place you talked about and I did it. And I did it clean. And the 45 seconds of what you might call it grunts and exerts and shrieks and screams, I got them all right that first take. Once again, most insignificant little thing, but I'm patting myself on the back because it was a cool thing that I pulled off.
Mm-hmm.
So it was dark, not only thematically, but also technically, because I wanted to chase it dark, chase it blind. I didn't want to prepare it. And what came out is what, if you watch that show and you see that episode, because the actor you're looking at is not the actor you're hearing, it's me. I did something cool for Philip Noyce on Salt, the Angelina Jolie movie.
Yeah.
And I kept a page of my cues for him, and I had him autograph it.
Okay.
But I'm not much of the memorabilia guy that way. In 1975, I went to the Hammer Monsterthon because I was a Hammerhead as a boy. I loved all the Draculas and Frankensteins and Peter Cushing's, Christopher Lee's, and Peter Cushing was there. And I spent far too much money I didn't have because I was a high school junior for a Hammer history book. And I got online and met Mr. Cushing, my hero, and he autographed he autographed the page where his picture was for me. That's sort of like my number one cherished piece of memorabilia.
Okay.
So I don't have very many, but that's the biggie.
Okay. And my final question is always asking, what do you want your legacy to be?
I want to keep working. I want to keep working for a long, long time. I love working on mic. I love working on stage. I love working on camera. I want to get more roles. I want to get better roles. I want to make a lot of people laugh. Working on stage is amazing because you hear the response right away.
Mm-hmm.
But it's ephemeral. I can tell you that I've done a couple of Broadway shows, but you can look it up, but you can't see it. It's done.
Right.
You can go out there cyberspace and find the Star Maker or find My Grandpa Was an Alien, is an alien. But so there's good things for both. I can name you several actors who passed away on the job, like on stage doing the show, and just boom. I do find that appealing. I don't want it to be anytime soon. As a young man leaving Alfred and All My Children, I remember being kind of cocky about, I don't want Alfred to be the first line in my Variety obituary. Probably will be at this point. I find myself getting more attracted to political material. Both of the plays I did on Broadway were both with my friend Bryan Cranston, and both were political. I'm feeling more and more of an impulse to write that kind of material. because it's such a politically dramatic time in our history. So we'll see what I come up with the next couple of years. If this, I mean, yeah, if I don't make it home with the dogs tonight and this is my legacy, okay.
Okay.
But let's see if I can build on it.
Okay. Well, thanks. I'm glad that we got to do this.
This is great, Chris. Thank you so much for the invitation. And thanks everybody who's still watching and made it all the way to the end.
I'll be sure to send it to you once I have it up too, if you want to see it.
Great. I'll post it on my social media.
Oh, great. Okay.
Okay, Chris. Thanks again. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.